Thank you very much. Great to be here, and good afternoon. So I have the task of getting things started here, and I will start by asking you a question. How many of you have ever driven a car, or ridden a bicycle, or taken a train or an airplane? So I think we understand that mobility is important to all of us. It's part of our life. So today I'm going to talk about what will it take to sustain mobility. It might be different tomorrow than it is today. So what vehicles will our grandchildren drive? Mobility represents a lot of important things to us. It represents personal freedom, autonomy, access to things, accessibility. So it's a universal aspiration. It is something that really everyone aspires to in some sense. But mobility takes energy. So imagine with me for a moment if you were able to take a picture of the world from up in the outer space and see where the lights are on. In the picture that I show you here, the brightness of the lights is a representation of how much energy is used in different parts of the world. And you can see that some parts are brighter than others, and some parts are getting brighter as we go, especially on the Asian continent, China, the Indian subcontinent, increased energy use. Why? Well, there is a strong correlation between use of energy in our society and our productivity and economic well-being. So economic prosperity really comes with greater demand for energy. So in this picture, if you looked at it carefully, you could see that countries such as South Korea, Ireland, just to mention a couple of examples, have doubled their energy usage over the last 30, 40 years as their economy has increased, improved, expanded. So with greater prosperity, there comes greater demand for energy. But where does this energy come from? So a pie chart to answer the question, where does this energy come from? And the biggest slice of the pie, many of you will not be surprised to hear this, is petroleum. 37% of the energy used in the United States comes from petroleum. Natural gas has become number 2. Coal has been moved down to number 3. And what's the rest? About 9% nuclear power and 8% renewables. So if we want to think about a sustainable future, we'll have to think about ways to make that 8% somehow increase, and that's not going to be an easy thing to do. So why do I say these things about energy? Because mobility requires energy in order to enable us to transport ourselves and transport goods from one place to another. And let me ask you a question here. I want an answer from the audience. How many cars do you think are driving around the world today? You in front here, give me a number. 10 million is the answer. Well, I'll tell you what the right answer is. 1 billion. Today there are 1 billion cars going around the world, and if China, India, Brazil, Africa continue to develop the way they're developing today, tomorrow we may have a world with 2 billion cars. So what comes with 2 billion cars? Well, what comes with 2 billion cars, as you can see in these pictures, is congestion, but a lot more than that, demand for fuels. But there is another trend that is very important to us, megacities. There is a trend in urbanization today. People are moving to cities more and more, especially in countries that are still developing their economies. And that is because that's where the money is, that's where the jobs are. I'll give you a number, a data point. Today, every year, 20 million people move from rural China into urban areas. That's 20 million people a year. So what will the megacities of tomorrow look like? Well, it will create all kinds of problems with respect to mobility and accessibility. We're going to have to think about how we get around in a different way. I'll give you a quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, I took the subway train from the outskirts of Beijing to the center of the city for the first time ever. I'd never been on a Chinese subway, and I was absolutely stunned at the frequency, size, and population on the trains on this subway. And I started doing some arithmetic in my mind that led me to calculate how many people every morning with this train coming, every 60 seconds, move into the center of Beijing. And the number is absolutely stunning. So megacities, we have to think about this as well. But let's go back to the fuel part, because as it turns out, petroleum is what drives 95% of our mobility needs today. That's simply the way it is. And that picture shows that our demand for petroleum is expected to continue to grow pretty much with a linear trend for the next 20 years. So what do we do with this? Does it make sense? How can we deal and cope with this petroleum consumption? I'll give you a couple of numbers to take home. Today, we use 85 million barrels of petroleum per day. That translates into 1,000 barrels of petroleum per second. So you calculate how many barrels of petroleum we burnt while I was giving you this 10-minute presentation. So what do? Petroleum has been the essence of transportation for 100 years. What are we going to do for the next 100 years? And what are the fuels of the future? Could we use biofuels? Corn has been tried and is actually in place today. But how about alternatives? Switchgrass, algae, sugarcane. Well, biofuels are a good idea in the sense that they are renewable. We can keep growing them, but what if we grow them on the same land that we need to produce food? So competition between fuels and food is something that we're going to have to think about very deeply. Now, if you live in Ohio and you have not heard much about natural gas in the last couple of years, there is a problem here. Lots of talk about shale gas. You look at that picture, the big dark area is the expectation of how shale gas production in the US will grow between now and 2040. Well, natural gas has a lot of advantages. It's cleaner when used in transportation applications than petroleum, lower greenhouse gas impact when we use it to produce electricity. It's better than coal, but there are all kinds of issues that we need to resolve. You've heard about hydraulic fracturing and the potential for contaminating the water table. So there are a lot of questions that we still need to answer, and this is not necessarily the final answer. How about electricity? Electric cars, that sounds really cool, right? Electric cars, they're quiet. We could someday use renewable energy, solar, photovoltaic. What a wonderful idea. But you know what? Electricity also requires a primary energy source. And I call your attention to the color yellow in this graph. United States, Australia, China, lots of yellow. What's that yellow? That's the coal that we burn to make electricity. 50% of our electricity is produced by burning coal. 60% in Australia. In China, the number approaches 80%. So until we can find a way to produce electricity differently, it may not be viable for us to think about electric vehicle as a widespread solution. So what am I saying here? Do we not have an answer to the question? I mean, petroleum, biofuels, natural gas, electricity, what do we do? Well, there is always a biofuel-fed alternative that we can hope for in the future if all else fails. So what do we do at Ohio State in this field? We have, for over 20 years, had a Center for Automotive Research on the West Campus, and our mission is to educate students to change the mindset, to change the thinking process behind transportation. We educate primarily engineers, but also students who work in business communications, marketing, design. And the idea is to explore concepts that will make it possible to have lighter, more fuel-efficient vehicles that run on alternative fuels, and also to think about different mobility concepts. So what will be the face of future mobility? Well, you see some pictures here that pertain to many different concept vehicles and real vehicles. Tomorrow's mobility, especially in urban settings, will be driven by vehicles that are small, convenient, easy to use. I'll give you an example. I was in Paris last October for a conference, and I noticed that in the city of Paris, there are actually all of these zip car-like electric vehicles where if you're a member of the club, you can scan your card, take the electric vehicle, drive it for whatever you have to do, plug it into another station, and move on. Well, these types of things, very small vehicles that are easy to park. Look at the lower right corner there. Maybe we can stack these little cars on top of one another. Electric bicycles, public transportation. We'll have to rethink the way in which we move so that we can think about transportation and mobility in highly urbanized areas, so that we can think about zero emissions, low noise, environmentally friendly solutions, and maybe accessibility doesn't necessarily require transportation, moving. Today, everyone understands Skype, WebEx, but tomorrow we may be able to use tools such as virtual presence, where you might be able to see holographic images of the people with whom you want to interact. That will allow you to conduct your business and your interactions, at least partially, without having to actually move yourself from one point to another. So the exciting part of this is that there is a lot of work for us to do. There are a lot of thinking. We need people with ideas. We need concepts. We need innovation. We need entrepreneurs who are willing to have the courage to develop new concepts and launch them. So I leave you with this quote. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestor. We borrow it from our children. So as long as we think about the world as something that belongs not to us, but to the generations that will follow us, I am sure that we will be able to do the right thing. Thank you very much for your attention.